Welcome to the Never Stop Getting Better podcast presented by CoxHealth. Yes, you heard that right. We've added a new partner to the show, and we couldn't be more thankful for CoxHealth stepping up as our presenting sponsor. CoxHealth is the region's leading not for profit health system, serving 25 counties through six hospitals and over 100 clinics, with more than 14,000 dedicated employees committed to keeping our community healthy and close to home. We're proud to have them behind this show. Now, let's get into the show. Thank you, Cox Health. All right, welcome to the show today, where we're going to have one of our most interesting guests that we've had on here. And this episode, when it comes out, will be well over 300. We'll be 310, 12, something like that. But this guy right here has had a life all balled up in a short time span already. Our guest today is Chuck Dow. He is the managing director at Synergy Wealth Solutions, where he leads and develops a growing team of financial advisors while helping clients build international and personalized financial roadmaps. He was born into a military family at Fort Leonard Wood. Chuck's early life was shaped by constant movement, living abroad in Germany and across the U.S. before ultimately settling in Springfield, Missouri. He has been in several different lines of work. He worked in the timeshare business for a long time, 14 years maybe. Started out as a rapper, which is unbelievable. I would not have known that when we met for the first time. It just kind of shocked me. But beyond business, Chuck is deeply committed to impact and making a difference. He is the founder of Borrow My Angel, which is a nonprofit inspired by his late sister's battle with mental illness, focused on increasing access to mental health care and awareness. He and his wife Jody are also active in their community and faith through North Point Church and the Springfield Dream Center. Chuck's leadership philosophy is rooted in humility, continuous growth, and what he calls relentless forward momentum, a mindset that drives both his personal life and his professional success. Chuck, man, I appreciate you taking and making the time to come on the show today.
I'm honored, my friend. I mean it. And congrats on, I've listened to quite a few of the episodes. So two thoughts I have there. One, big congrats on being over 300 episodes. And two, setting the stage for one of the most interesting guests, I think is a high bar considering some of the guests. I don't know that I would consider myself that, but I mean it. I'm
Well,
honored to hang out with you today. I'm fired up.
Well, it's been great to get to know you, and when we met at my favorite Mexican restaurant, right, which is El Puente. You can never go wrong with that. I just your story is awesome. Like it really is. Like it's a story of, overcoming, continuing to get better, which is what, I mean, heck, it's the name of the podcast, Never Stop Getting Better. I feel like that you have lived that life. Now, this is the first time I've ever gotten to do this, right? In 300 episodes, but I am going to play just a short clip of a song that I run across on YouTube, okay? I just want the people to hear this because I think it's pretty good. This is called Everflow. What happened to my what happened to my YouTube? Oh man, it messed me up. Hold on. I want to play it because I
We're
thought it
full
was really
old
good. This is
school
this is
overflow.
this is called Overflow. Is that
Overflow.
right?
Overflow.
Overflow.
Yeah.
Over.
Lifetimes ago.
OVA.
OVAFLOW was the group.
Yeah, well, I ran
Overflow.
across this and I thought, man, this is awesome. You had actually sent me the clip because I didn't believe
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
One, two, one, two. Microphone overflow is in the building. Mic check one, two. G, y'all.
Now, I don't know that I've had a rapper on before, so I'm excited to have my first rapper, okay? I guess this is where I want to start. I'm reading a
Yeah.
book right now that is probably going to be one of the top five books I've ever read. Okay. The very first book I ever read, really, real book, was Good to Great by Jim Collins. Well, Jim Collins has been researching for the last 15 years his new book that just come out this week, and it's called What to Make of a Life. What to Make of a Life. And in that book, he is studying encodings. Like, how do people find their encodings? And I would say encodings, what he means by encodings is, like your internal operating system, your internal wirings. I would say encodings is what God put you on this earth to do. Like, and so where I want to start is this. In your early life, give me, a brief history of your early life, like what was life like? And I think you're a person that is been searching for your encodings. I think you've been searching for, like your internal wirings because you've done several different things, which started off as a rapper with Overflow, which, I thought was really interesting. I think that's really cool. So just get me to wanting to be a rapper.
So first off, yes, big fan,
I
literally
love
right
it.
behind. Huge fan of Jim Collins. I'm literally also too. I will share one of my favorite quotes is champions take copious notes. I'm literally writing down the title of that book. I guarantee I'll pick that up right away.
No doubt.
Um, it's an interesting question, because I'll be 50 in a couple of years, and there's some days where I still feel like I'm trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with my life, right? And it also comes, I think, the older I get, the more I realize none of us ever truly figure it out because it is a journey the whole way through, right? Um, I think early for me, look, there's a lot of people who had it a lot worse than I've had it, but I didn't have the easiest time growing up. We had an interesting family dynamic, was kind of all over the place. And truth be told, as a late teenager, young adult, I just really didn't have a ton of good influence in my life. And I was forced to figure it out. And I've always felt like God put me here. Not that I'm anything special, but I'm here to do something, right? And again, I knew that I felt like deep down, but also too, I didn't have the right mentors around me to point me in the right direction and figure it out. The hip hop thing, the rapper thing was really more of a fluke kind of deal, but I've always had a passion for music. I've got a very wide range of musical influence. I actually started playing piano as a young age. Again, I've always been obsessed with music, stumbled into the hip hop scene, found out I was pretty good at it, started to pursue it. And, again, there was a stretch there from the time I was about 18, 19 years old to when I was about 23, 24. I thought genuinely that's what I was going to do with my life. Right. And I think looking back now, many years later, right, that's multiple decades ago. It's funny because it seems like lifetimes ago. And sometimes I look back and I forget that was me, because it was long enough ago. But there's lessons you learn from all that, right? I poured my heart and soul into that, and I attacked it no different than now. Fast forward to today, the way I attack my business every day, the way I attack growing our nonprofit and the mission of Borrow My Angel. And I think just having to go through really hard things at a young age taught me some of that grit of that relentless forward momentum I always talk about of you're going to get punched in the mouth. Things aren't always going to go the way you expect them to, but you've got two choices, right? It's how you react to it. Are you going to just fall down and be defeated? Or are you going to get back up and keep moving? So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but it was like, I don't know that I ever had this shining light aha moment of like, hey, here's what I'm supposed to do with my life. But I really have probably spent my life trying to figure it out. I can look in the eye and tell you now with what I get to do every day in my business, and then being a dad and a husband to my wife, and the nonprofit project that I'm passionate about. I'm comfortable in my own skin in this season, right?
Yeah.
I definitely feel like I've found my niche and I've found my calling, at least in this season of what God's called me to do. Now, I've also felt like I've lived enough life that 20 years from now, who knows if I'll still be doing any of it, right? And I think some of that you just got to roll with the punches of life and see what's next.
Do you still have a passion for music?
100%.
Which,
It's funny because the opposite end of the spectrum now, my musical outlet these days, because I played piano as a kid. I got to about 11, 12 years old and didn't think it was cool anymore. I didn't touch a piano for almost 20 full years. And now actually I play keys on the worship team for our church. And that's actually how I met my wife, is through relationships, through playing keys in the worship team.
wow. See, as I sit there and think about the book I'm reading, I think about encodings. Like that would be an encoding, just the music part of not a particular profession, line of work, but this draw to music, which obviously started out early as a rapper, but now turns into the worship team. Tell me this: why do some people? Because childhood wasn't super easy, right? You've already said there was your fair share of adversity, not the greatest of role models. Why do some people have issues coming out of that and surviving and thriving, and some people don't? Like what allowed you, like why did you, and I say make it, I mean come out of, where you are now, like you're a healthy, you know, married father, Christian, like what allowed you to come out of that when some people don't?
I honestly, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I'd tell you the best answer I know is literally, just not to sound super spiritual, but it's the grace of God. I'll share a story that's kind of a reflective moment. Part of my childhood was I never knew my biological dad. He left my mom when I was less than 2 years old, so I don't remember any of that. And all I knew about him was he was a drug addict and used to beat up my mom and my older brother. When I was an adult, my wife and I actually were engaged. We weren't even yet married. And I'm 39 years old at this point, and we had actually somehow reconnected. And at this point in my life, I'd had one conversation with him throughout my entire life. I ended up driving up to Indiana to go visit him when I was 39, and he's since passed away. So I'm glad I made that journey. But I literally meet all these aunts and uncles and cousins and this entire side of a family I had never met in my entire life. And as an adult, I'm going to meet them. And I remember on the drive home, that family has been ravaged by heroin addiction and a lot of demons. And, you know, it's one of those, my wife and I were talking on the way home, and it's like, how am I lucky enough that I just happened to get out of that mess? And my mom made enough good decisions to pull me out of that mess that, had he been around, who knows? I just as easily could have become a product of that environment and found myself in that same scene. So I'd love to say it's something special I've done. I don't know that I can take credit for that. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, there's so many stories. I have friends that will tell you that they've never touched alcohol because their father was an alcoholic and their brother is an alcoholic because their father was an alcoholic. Like let's go back to, we are all encoded specially, you know what I mean? And like I don't know the answer. It's always kind of been a curious question for me because in this, in the education field, you see so many kids that come from good homes, bad homes, broken homes, that it just always has amazed me how sometimes some people can just far outdo what they were genetically born into. What about and this is just a curious question, a personal
Yeah.
question I'm curious about, growing up not having a biological dad, how much impact on you did that have, as a young kid, as a junior high, as a high school? Was that a major issue? Not a major issue? You dealt with it pretty good? Like,
It's funny answering that question now, because if I'd answered that years and years ago, I'd have told you, Coach, it didn't bother me at all. I never needed it. Right. The reason I think my stance has probably changed is I've put myself in therapy over the last few years and unpacked a lot of trauma. And I think those were probably lies I was telling to myself to bury some of that stuff down.
yeah,
Now, I can tell you for sure, I've never felt like a victim, because I feel like that's a worthless emotion, right? Um, I just really, it is what it is. I never dwelled on it. I never felt like, oh, woe is me. Please feel sorry for me. It just is what it is. That was the hand that I was dealt. Um, I can tell you though now, I became a dad now. My oldest is going to be 6 here in just a few weeks, and I've got a 2-year-old, so I've become a dad very late in life. Man, my perspective though now, knowing
Mm.
like, I mean, I can literally tell you, my wife and I were sitting on the couch one day, and my oldest was, I think he had just turned 18 months. And it was like out of the blue, I'm sitting there and I have this thought that slapped me in the face. And I turned to my wife and I'm like, at this season of my life, 18 months old, my dad was already gone. Right. And so it's just that powerful why of like, man, I refuse to allow my boys to grow up and have the same experience of just no guide, no
Yeah.
one there to be there. But it just, I felt like I just had to deal with it. It was the hand I was dealt. It was what it was.
Well, one thing that I sometimes think about now, like having, two kids of my own and now a grandkid, I do have the thought, which I know is a judgmental thought, but I have the thought, like, how could any dad walk away from their kid? Like, it's so hard for me to understand that. But I've also learned to have a different perspective, and not be judgmental and to make statements. Like now I will say things like, had I been raised by that guy's parents, lived in that guy's house, been through the experiences that that guy had, maybe I would understand. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying
Yeah.
that, I do, I can ride both sides of that, like how can you, but then how bad is that person's life to walk away from? You know what I mean? Like my heart almost breaks for them to be in the situation that they're in, that they've come to that. You know what I mean? Like that's heartbreaking. I want to ask you this because,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious, as you were growing up, as you were, trying and searching and trying to figure out who you were, was there anybody, like was there anybody that you would say was a positive influence, that was a mentor that you could look to, whether it was a relative or a friend or like I'm just curious, was there a somebody that you can pinpoint that, that person really was a positive influence in a tough time?
It took a while. It wasn't when I was a kid. I was 25 years old when I met him, but 100% I have told her many times there's not a single more influential person in my entire life. There's a friend of mine by the name of Vicky Lynn. She was my boss when I actually first stumbled really to get serious about my career. It was in this era where I was kind of growing up, realized I didn't want to be 30 years old and be a rapper anymore. And she hired me on fresh and green. I'm in a season where I'm trying to figure out, like you talk about trying to find your niche and your passion and your direction. Um, Her leadership example, the way she mentored me, there's not in a million years would I ever be where I'm at today if it wasn't for her.
Wow.
She is to this day the best boss I've ever had. She's a big sister figure. We stay in touch, still to this day. In fact, I've got a coaching call with her every 3 or 4 weeks. We check in, and she is a brilliant woman. She went on to become a vice president with Disney. She's a certified strengths finder coach that teaches large corporations all around the world to this day, and one of the smartest and wisest people I've ever met. And no question, I kind of had different people in my life, and there's other mentors, right? None of us have this
Sure.
one single person, but if I were to pinpoint one, no question, it was her. Just to really, I think she finally saw something in me that I had this raw passion of. I knew where I wanted to go, but I didn't have the brightest clue on how to get to this vision I saw for my life. And here was somebody who had been there before. And what's funny is there's a longer story. I don't want to go too far down and waste time, but I literally went into her office. I had only been working for her for 6 weeks, and I said, "Look, I've seen enough where I want your job. Like I'm here entry level. I was making $8 an hour at the time, right? But I'm like, I want your job." And she didn't laugh me out of the room. She literally sat me down and goes, "Okay, great. You want to do it? Here's what you need. You don't have experience here. You need that. You don't have experience here. You need that. And literally mapped it out for me and so didn't laugh me out of the room and said, I'm going to teach you. And if you're willing to be a good student and learn, I'll guide you and I'll literally tell you the path to get there, but you still got to do the work. Right. And what's pretty awesome is within 4 years, I got that promotion and they made me a regional director to her level. And that's why I ended up moving out to the East Coast. And it was just, man, I would have never gotten there if it wasn't for her leadership.
Yeah, it's awesome how, sometimes God gives us what we need, not necessarily what we always want, but he has in my life too. He has,
Yeah.
I got fired as an assistant coach in 2000, but then I got hired by the greatest high school football coach in the state of Mississippi. So like, like what a blessing when I look back on it, right? Like what a blessing, like that I had the opportunity because I wouldn't be here today without that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm sure you can look back in your life and there's a lot of
And
things that may not have went your way, but the what came out of it was something spectacular.
I think that's what's so interesting about that, right? Though, like, because in that moment, did it feel like a blessing?
Oh no.
Right. And so it's hindsight's a funny thing, but that's exactly it is like, because I've never actually thought about that story is the day I started that job, I don't even remember actually what it was that I had left to go there, but I certainly wasn't in a great place.
Right.
Right. And that's such an interesting piece of that because you're exactly right. Like it's a door closing to get to there, but God has a funny way of steering that.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that says everything's gonna go your way. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but what is in the Bible, is Romans 8:28, where it says, and we know that in all things, God works for good for those who love him. Like, and all things means getting fired. All things mean going through tough time. That's what all things means, right? And I get it, and I would handle it better today than I handled it when I was 28, 29 years old. Like I thought the world was coming to an end, right? But I can look back now and see the blessing. Walk me through when faith became a part of your life. Like how did faith enter your life? Was it something, from childhood or something that, you got into later on?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I grew up, I grew up in a household. So my stepdad that my mom was married to growing up, which was actually my sister's dad. So we had same moms, different dads. And it was super strict Southern Baptist. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night revival, you name it. Very, very strict Southern Baptist. And I grew up in that. And then what ends up happening, especially with the season of life I was going through as a late teenager, early 20s, completely got out of it. It just had a stretch where I always knew deep down I needed to come back to my faith, but it certainly wasn't a priority by any means, right? And really how all these stories intertwine is, my sister again battled mental health for a long time, and I know we'll get into that story, but she passed away in 2014. I was also going through some other heavy things in life around that season, 2015, and really just got to a place. It wasn't like my life was over. There were still good things, right? My career was going well and some other things, but I had just gone through such heavy loss that I just felt this pull of I need to get back involved in a church. And what's actually really it's just kind of funny looking back on now because anybody who knows me, I'm about as extroverted as they come, right? I talk to the people in the checkout line at the grocery store, right? I've
Sure.
never been a stranger. What's funny is I had visited North Point Church, which is where we go today, and there was something about North Point, not to suddenly give a plug there, but what I loved about North Point is when I visited, one, it didn't feel like the church that I grew up in. Not that that's a bad approach, but I knew that's not what I needed in my life. And what I loved about North Point is every interaction with them, it was obvious, it was most important of what are they doing for the community, right? What are they doing outside these walls? And that felt right. Like that felt like that's what the church should be. So I'm in this season in 2015 where it's like I need to get involved, but I don't know where to start. And I was in a rough place, right? Going through losing my sister and some other things happening. So I go and I visit. And coach, I'm not exaggerating. I think it was a solid 18 months that I went almost every single Sunday. I slipped in. I went by myself, slipped in the back, sat in the back row, didn't talk to a soul. Now, see, I'm going to get emotional talking about it. Like half the time I'm crying through the worship service, but just knew I needed to be there, right? Snuck back out, didn't build any community. I just knew I needed to be there. And what's interesting now of these threads of literally what changed is I'm addicted to Starbucks as I sit here drinking my coffee. I'm in a Starbucks one day and I see a guy that I recognize and I'm like, "Hey, you play on the worship team for at North Point." He said, "Yeah." We get to talking. I accidentally let it slip that, oh, by the way, I play piano, and his eyes light up, right? He's like, we need keys player on the worship team. I've never played in a band in my life, right? So somehow before I know it, I'm getting suckered in as playing keys on the worship team. And literally through that, that's when I finally built a community at the church. And then through that is how I ultimately then met my wife.
Mm.
Um, so it's just kind of it's crazy how the threads all work together, and that's really where that was a really long answer, but that's where my faith came back in because I just knew I was in a season where I needed to get involved again.
I spent some time yesterday. I got a brother that's about 18 months younger than me, and I spent some time on the phone with him yesterday. He still lives in Mississippi, and we got to talking about, our faith and he mentioned, isn't it weird how when things are going great, sometimes we tend to think, man, we got this, boy. We tend to take that part for granted. But as soon as life gets hard, and times get tough, then we start going and looking for him. You know what I'm saying? Now I have learned at 54 years old to try to lean on him all the time. But it is
Yeah,
funny when things are great, we're like, yeah, we got this. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden,
100%.
like life has a funny way of God has a funny way, probably not so funny, of giving you what you need. You know what I mean? And sometimes we need to be humbled because it's not about us, right? Like it's not like
Yep.
and when we start thinking it is, something challenging is going to happen. All right, I want to ask you this because answer was fantastic, and I appreciate you sharing that. Like,
Yeah.
being a person of faith is not something that, I don't shy away from it. That's not, like I love it. And I grew up, my dad was a preacher growing up, so I have been, not that I have always acted like it, I can assure you of that, but I've always known like you that it was something that I needed and something that needed to be a part of my life. How much of a blessing has your wife, Jody, been?
She's a rock star. The way I described her when I was dating her, and I still describe her to the day to today, she genuinely is the best human I've ever met. Like I've outkicked my coverage on that deal. So Jody, for anybody listening who's not familiar with my wife, her lifelong dream, from the time she was 9, 10 years old, is she wanted to grow up and be Mother Teresa.
Mm.
And that's literally what her dream has always been, and she literally then decided she's going to manifest that dream, and so she founded through North Point the Springfield Dream Center, and so she's the founder and executive director. And I think it's really kind of cool too how, look, when we met, I'm almost 40. We're 9.5 years apart. She's 30. I'm getting ready to turn 40. And we both kind of had our paths in life kind of set out. So it's a very different how sometimes, you see high school sweethearts and they're figuring out life together. We took a very different path. We kind of had figured out what we were going to do in life before we ever even met. And look, we don't have a perfect marriage because I don't know that it exists. We still have hard times. We fight, we argue. But I think it's what I hope that we do really well, and I'd like to think we do really well, is I would also still never be where I'm at today if it wasn't for the support of her over the last 8, 9 years as we've been together. And I know my business and my organization and my nonprofit and the things that I get to do in life are better because her be, because of having her as a partner. And I would love to think that the Dream Center is in a better place today because I've been able to support her along the way on that same journey. It's that old adage of 1 + 1 = 3. I am far more efficient in all the things that I do, knowing I have someone like Jody having my back and supporting me. And I hope that she could say the same thing.
I love that. And like you know, like one of the blessings that I know the good Lord has been good to me, okay, because I've gotten things that I did not deserve, and my wife was one of them. Man, I was shipped to Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas from Mississippi because my parents knew I needed the good Lord because things weren't going great. She was shipped from Atlanta, Georgia to Searcy, Arkansas to get away from a boy. And we meet in Arkansas. And, it's one of the reasons why, like, I have a lot of dreams, man. I dream big. I think about all types of things. And one of the things
Yeah.
that I think one day that I want to do is I want to get into some coaching business with people because this is what I believe. When your job is great and your home life is great and your relationships are great, man, life is awesome. And my
Yeah.
life is awesome, man. I have awesome people that I work with and for. I come home and me and my wife are best friends and the best. And it's gotten better. I mean, we've been married over 30 years and it's better today than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And to me, that's what life's supposed to be like, man. Like you need to share it with somebody. It needs to get better and better and better. And I believe that the good life is available for everybody. Let's do this. Let's jump into because this was really the way we met. I got to come to one of your, I don't know what you called that, like your fundraising event or whatever it was. Let's jump
Yeah.
into Borrow My Angel. Tell me, obviously that's built around your sister. Tell me about your sister and tell me about, your nonprofit that you run and are so proud and deeply proud of.
Yeah, I'm excited for where it's at. It's where it's been and where it's going. Borrow started, so you kind of go back and we've shared some of that again. My sister, when she was 12 years old, tried to take her life at only 12 by shooting herself, which
Mm.
first off is almost unheard of at that age, a female using a gun. And what was happening at the time, so the backdrop is again, we had different dads, same mom, right? And her dad was married to my mom most of my life growing up from the time I could remember. And then they were going through their divorce around my senior year of high school. But she attempted to shoot herself when she was 12, and the only way she survived it was she actually tried to shoot herself in the heart. And the gun kicked, and it went just missed her heart barely, but she still almost didn't survive it. She spent a good week in the ICU. And so then you think about now you got a 12-year-old girl, you've got it's hard enough being a 12-year-old girl to begin with. You got to explain to all your friends why you haven't been at school for the last few weeks recovering, right? You got a bullet hole scar now through your shoulder. She never fully recovered full use of her left hand because of it. And that's not even talking about the mental state which she was in, which brought her there to begin with, right? And so and her name was Charity. So with Charity's story, just watching her, that really was like the moment where we just had these ebbs and flows. And if for anybody who's ever watched anybody who really has battled lifelong with depression and mental illness, it's not a flat line. There are good days and there are bad days and there are seasons of ups and downs. And that's really what her life was like. And on my 21st birthday, she tried again, survived again, another suicide attempt at 16 years old. And really then from there for a stretch, she had a pretty good run. She was in and out of different treatment facilities and whatnot. And then you fast forward, this would have been 2009. So she was 26 at the time. And she had an older half sister, if you can follow the messy family dynamic, that was same dads, different moms, where she and I were same moms, different dads. So it was actually my ex stepsister came back in my sister's life, and they get in a big argument one day, and they don't talk for a week. And before they ever speak again, Charity, her older sister, ends her life by shooting herself with the same gun Charity used when she was 12.
Mm.
Um, So now you have, one, she's already had moments where she's been in a tough place mentally. You have this guilt. You can't say sorry to your sibling. You have this horrible connection that she ended her life with the same weapon. And we just kind of knew, like, we're getting ready to go through another cycle again. And I remember there's just this helpless feeling, right? Of like, I want to wrap my arms around you and protect you and make sure you're going to be safe. But like, it's helpless. Like, what do you do? And sure enough, it was less than 90 days later, she tried again and she miraculously survived again. That third attempt, she actually took a bunch of pills, drank a ton of alcohol, and then she tried to cut her wrist. And for anybody who knows, a lot of times when you see someone cutting their wrist, it's more of a cry for help. Well, this was not that. So, not to be really graphic, but she literally took a kitchen steak knife and opened her wrist up, literally from the wrist to the elbow, cut 16-point stars on both sides. Like, she was genuinely trying to bleed out. But thankfully, her roommate found her quickly, rushed her by ambulance to the hospital. They pumped her stomach. And so I share that much detail because I remember walking in that day. It was locally here at the Marion Center, and the first two suicide attempts, because she was 5 years younger than me, and there was a stretch there where we were going through so much chaos. I was very much more a father figure than an older brother, right? Because I had to grow up really quickly and figure stuff out when I'm 16, 17 years old. And so the first couple times she survived attempts, I would walk in and I was typically the one person that could usually get through, right? And she'd see me and it would be like, Chuck, I'm so sorry. I was in a tough place, and very apologetic. This time, this one was completely different than the first two. The only word she said to me that day was, I'm just mad it didn't work. And I mean, just hit me like a ton of bricks, right? And I remember sitting in the parking lot. It probably took me a couple hours before I could even compose myself to drive home. And that night, so you got all of these life storylines playing out. We happened to be in the studio recording a third album at the time for Overflow. And as a musician, I was already in songwriting mode because you get in those modes and you kind of you see experiences in life and go, okay, I'm going to write something about that. Well, that night I go home and the only thing I knew just to even get off my chest what I was feeling watching her going through it was I just grabbed a pen and started writing. And when I wrote that night, true story, I had no intention of anybody ever seeing what I wrote. I sat down and what my goal was just how do I get through to her, right? And so I started writing this song called Borrow My Angel. And I kept coming back to this concept of I truly believe we all have a guardian angel. You've now survived 3 suicide attempts. You clearly could use 2 more than I even need my own right now. So I'll let you borrow my angel. And so I write this song, and when she comes out of the facility, she got finally properly diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. Got put on new medication, and she came to me and was like, Chuck, this song is way bigger than the both of us. Like, we need to do something with this, right? So we started brainstorming and launching a nonprofit all the way back then. So this would have been, 2011, 2012. I started researching what a 501c3 would take. It's a lot, unfortunately, and it kind of just got pushed to a back burner and never happened. Because the original idea was we'd start it, she could go around, share her story, and hopefully people would get strength, and that would be the goal of Borrow. Well, it gets pushed to the back burner. And unfortunately, then she passed away in 2014 before we ever launched it. 3 years later, I was speaking at an event for my business, and I was asked to share the backstory of Charity's journey. And that was that moment of like, it's time, right? We need to finally do this. So in 2017, 2018, we finally did the research, did the homework, started kind of getting some momentum, and we got our 501c3 officially back in 2018. Then the next 5 years is what I always talk about. We sort of wandered in the desert because it's one thing to launch a nonprofit, but what you don't want to do is duplication, right? You don't want to create an organization that's just doing the same thing another nonprofit is already doing really well.
Sure.
And so we knew from day one we wanted to be a mental health resource and suicide prevention, but we kept kind of struggling with how do we actually move the needle? How do we make a difference? And really, it was in 2023, just a few short years ago, there was this like flash of lightning aha moment. And it was actually a conversation with one of our friends and partners here, Chris Davis, who works over at Community Partnership of the Ozarks. He said one sentence one day and it completely changed everything. Because truth be told, I don't share this always publicly, truth be told, we were this close to actually shutting it down because I was getting frustrated of like, if we can't find something we can do, why do we exist? Right.
Sure.
And we were 5 years in at this point and really hadn't caught our stride. And Chris said something that day. He said, Chuck, I think you guys are missing the point. He's like, the magic of Borrow My Angel is telling stories. And he actually told this story of the first time he had ever heard me tell this story I'm sharing today. And he's like, that's important. There is a lot of research that shows the reason why many people don't go get the mental health help that they need continues to be the stigma that surrounds mental health.
Yeah.
And more research shows the way to attack that stigma is simply have the conversation, right? Humanize it, tell stories. He's like, I think you guys just simply need to lean into that and tell stories to humanize this conversation around mental health. And it was like, got it. That's all I needed to hear. So we revamped our mission statement, revamped our vision, and we have fully gone all in on this. We're going to attack this stigma by telling stories. Now, there's a third component of that. In fact, our three values are we want to reduce the stigma. We want to do education for prevention. There's a lot of really good education programs out there for suicide prevention. But that third component of our values is inspire hope. I think a lot of people talk about mental health, and if you're not careful, it can become a very dark and heavy conversation. We want to approach it that, look, we're going to attack what can be a very difficult topic of mental health and struggles and depression, but can we do it in a way that when people experience the stories that we tell, we do remind them of things that are uplifting, right? Recovery is possible. It's okay to not feel okay. For goodness sake, let's normalize therapy, right?
Mm.
So that's really what we've gone full board in. We're super excited about some of the things we have going. We've got this Stories of Hope video series that we're producing, and it's again, I'm getting fired up, talking about it because it's like I know the journey, what it took to get here, and how close we were to just walking away to going, man, once we had that trigger aha moment, things have started to kind of flywheel in the right direction and a lot of really exciting things to come.
Man, that's really good. Really, really good. And I appreciate you sharing. One of the words I thought about when you were talking was, man, like you gotta have hope, right? Like everybody's gotta have hope. Without hope, like man, life can be a challenge, you know what I'm saying? So you need to be hope smugglers, man. We need to smuggle hope to every human in the world. How did your sister end up passing away in 14?
It's one of those, the death certificate actually says accidental overdose. We'll never know. She took way too much medication that day, more than she was supposed to. There's a couple kind of oddities around her death that I believe it was intentional, but it doesn't matter. So that it was just unfortunate. She had been complaining she hadn't felt well, and I remember getting the phone call from my stepdad and just, hey, she's gone. She passed away on the couch, just laying there, and yeah. So
Let me ask you
it's tough.
this. I believe that like I truly believe all things are possible. Okay, like I believe that is, you know, I believe that's what the good Lord tells us, and I believe that. If there's somebody listening right now, that has a loved one that's dealing with, some form of mental illness, and I ask this in a very, very hypothetical, way, and I know this is not your necessarily your line of work. You're a financial
Yeah,
advisor,
yeah.
but what are some things that you think they could do to alter the path, to alter the outcome? What are some things that, could have possibly helped your sister, had, it come along earlier in our life? You know what I mean? Like, what is something you would advise, others to do that are going through it right now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're right. Like, it's I don't know all the answers by any stretch, right? I'm not a mental health professional, and half the time, if you talk to them, we're all still figuring it out.
Sure.
A couple things though come to mind. I will say first and foremost, one of it, and this is not to shamelessly self promote, but this is a big piece of what we're trying to do at Borrow is get more people educated on how to properly handle those conversations, right? There are two fantastic programs. One is QPR. It's basically the mental health version of CPR. That program takes a couple hours to complete. The larger program is mental health first aid training. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a more intense, about an 8 hour program. I will tell you, it's a little bit difficult and clunky on how to find where to go through those trainings. That is one thing we're actually working on right now with between the health department, Borrow, and a couple of other organizations. We're not the ones leading the charge, but we're trying to help where we can. Is how do we streamline that process so more people can go through that program? And I'm gonna get off topic, but it's along those lines. It's the reason that's so important, this epidemic of mental health, right? How massive the problem actually is. Because a lot of times we don't talk about it. You don't realize how many people are really
Mm,
battling their mental health because we hide
mm.
it, right? We tuck it down and away. If we truly understood how large the issue actually is, you could never in a million years train enough mental health professionals to deal with, right?
Yeah.
You could have 15 borough behavioral health in Springfield and it wouldn't be enough, right? So the point of mental health first aid training in QPR is how do we as the general public can we fill in some of that gap, right? Because sometimes you don't need a professional. It's coach, I'm having a bad day and I'm struggling. What I really need though is just somebody to listen to me and
Yeah.
let me vent, pat me on the back, tell me it's okay, I'll be fine, right? And it's like, and the problem is when we don't have that community, we self-medicate, we use all the wrong things to address it, then the problem gets worse and it escalates to where we do need a mental health professional, right?
Yeah.
So, long-winded answer of first and foremost, I'm a huge fan of QPR and mental health first aid training because the goals of those programs is when you're having those conversations is how do you identify, hey, this is something I could probably just be an ear and help and they're fine, versus no, I really think we've passed that point now.
Sure.
You need to talk to a professional, right? Let me help you find a professional. The simple things though is basic stuff. It's listen non-judgmentally. Let's remove language that creates stigma. This is a big one. Obviously, it's the focus of what Borrow is, but I'll never stop talking about it at this point. Like when you really have that aha moment of how differently we treat mental illness as opposed to how we treat physical illness in our society, it's beyond comprehension, right? The
Mm.
example I always give is like if I came to you and said, Coach, I just got back from the doctor, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, right? If I have that conversation with 100 people I know, 100 out of 100 people are going to react the same way, right? Compassion. Chuck, I'm so sorry. What can I do for you? Can I cook you a meal? Right? Because that's what how we react to a diagnosis of cancer. But if I go to those same 100 people and say, Coach, I'm just struggling so bad I can't convince myself to get out of bed. Suck it up. Get over it.
No
Right?
doubt.
And so that's just like, no, we've got to realize it is as often it's a chemical imbalance. It is a disease. The treatments are different. It doesn't necessarily have to be medication. Sometimes the treatment is a really good therapist, right? It's exercise, it's self-care routines, it's all these other things. But we got to start treating it as if it's a disease. And again, know when we can self-diagnose because it's not an issue that needs to be escalated to seeing a professional versus if you need to see a professional, all means find a professional.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer, and it's one that I have had mental illness issues in my family, and it's been a part of our life, and at times it's so disheartening because of the lack of service, the lack of help, the lack of like And
Yeah.
it's like you said, man, like if I have a torn ACL, I can find people to help me with that all over the state. You know what I mean? But if I have some serious, mental issues that are creating a thought pattern that's not serving me, then all of a sudden, man, like it's like you said, like get your mind right. Oh, okay. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like get your ACL right without help, like, it's
Yeah.
just, it is, and it's been, it has been a lifelong battle for us too, just, and it is disheartening. But, I'm super thankful for, what you're doing. And, I came to the event when David Cameron spoke, and, the events like that and the people like David that are willing to speak up. Because let's be honest, man, I was raised in a house where like you definitely ain't going to therapy. Like that ain't even a possibility, boy. Like suck it up and let's go. Right? Like that's
Yeah.
that's a generation of men now that are 54, 55, like that's us, and that's
Yeah.
like it's the farthest thing from, just go back to what you said, right? Like you gotta have help, man. Like you can't, you're not even like you're not meant to do this world by yourself, first of all, right? Like we're meant to be in communion and be together,
Yeah.
and it takes other people to help us along the way, man. Like, but that stigma has got to go. That's number one. You know what I mean? And us having more compassion, just like you said, if you're 100% right. If you came in and said you've got cancer, you'd have meals prepared at your house. You'd be, like people would be, throwing themselves at you, but
Yeah.
told them you had a
You know,
disorder, then they would be quite different.
two thoughts I have that I'm thinking as you're saying that. One is, look, this is part of what makes the problem so complicated, right? Though, because like as you're saying that, and I guarantee I would bet money you've had similar conversations with players of with mental health, it's a gray area. It's not as black and white, right? Look,
That's right.
I've managed thousands of employees literally in my life, and I'm a hypocrite because look, there are some times where I'm like, you just got to toughen up and get over it, because
Sure.
sometimes there is something to be said of having
Yes.
mental fortitude to fight through hard things, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough sometimes to understand where you cross that line and go, no, this isn't normal, right? We're truly dealing with the mental illness. Now, complete change of subject because something else you said, the vulnerability is a huge piece, and David Cameron, so what you've been referencing there, yeah, we had our Rise to Break the Stigma breakfast, which is kind of our signature event. We'll do it again this November, where we've shared some of these videos we've produced of our stories of hope. The first one was me actually telling Charity's story and sharing how Borrow My Angel came to be. And our vision is to continue to produce. In fact, if all goes to plan, we may go from having 2 videos on our library to 5 by the end of this year. We're in the process of recording 3 more. Um, David's story, though, man, I cannot thank him enough, because while I think Charity's story is incredibly powerful, what was so much even more powerful of David's story is it's first person. Right
Yeah.
here, you have somebody who is the city manager of Springfield, has a visible position. Here's a guy who's a lot of people will put on a pedestal because of his role in the community and all the different accomplishments that he's had in his life. And the mistake that we all make is go, okay, that guy's got it all together. And he was willing to come in and visit with us and share his story of his own personal battles with mental health, of just being vulnerable and saying, I don't have it all together. And it was just, there's a reason why. So that story resonated online incredibly. I think we had 110,000 views on Facebook alone within 30 days of posting that thing. And it's just because that is not common. It should be, but the
Yeah.
level of vulnerability he had to raise his hand and go, I'm not okay. I'm going to be fine. And here's the therapy journey that I'm on. And the reality is, I even told David and I had a conversation with him like, your story's not unique. And that's
No.
not to say you're not special. Nothing about his story is unique, because we probably all know 100 people battling the exact same thing. What is unique is his willingness to speak about it
Yeah.
and be transparent about it. And that's where we got to have more people doing that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that there's probably, he has, and he'll never know, right? Because a lot of times, we don't do a great job of appreciating other people like we should, but there are probably several people, in this community that changed their life. You know what I mean? By just him being,
No question.
who he was to get up and share the actual truth. And I think, just leadership in general, two traits that I find to be two of the most becoming traits of the best leaders, and that is, those that are authentic and those that are willing to be vulnerable, and he will do both. That's not he has both of
Yeah,
those in buckets, and that is, one of the reasons why he is in the position that he's in right now, because he
no
does both of
question.
those. How do, tell me how, if there's somebody listening that would like to get involved or help out or contribute to Borrow My Angel, how can they get involved?
Yeah, great question. And of course, as a nonprofit, it still runs on money, right?
Sure.
If you want to know more about our organization, you can find us on Facebook. You can go to our website. It's borrowmyangel.org. If you're local here in Southwest Missouri, we actually got a couple events coming up. One, don't know when this will air. We got an event coming up the first week of May. It's a lot of fun. It's a golf tournament we do every year at Big Shots Golf. This is the fifth year we've done it. The big one, though, coming up is November the 18th. This is our third annual Rise to Break the Stigma breakfast, what we're talking about. I am incredibly fired up for at least one, if not potentially two of the stories we will share that morning. What's funny about that event is, if you've ever worked in nonprofit, if you ever hosted a large event of that capacity, you kind of plan for your first time doing a brand new event, the thing's going to be a train wreck, right? And
Sure.
you got to just expect it and you learn your lessons. I don't know what it is about that particular event, but we've done it twice now, and both were as close, in my opinion, as perfection as you could find. There's just something magical that I don't even think we can take credit for. I think we've just stumbled on something that is really powerful and really important. The first year we told some really powerful stories. In fact, the very first year, I know you didn't get the chance to attend year one. The first year, when everyone walked in, one of the things we did that morning is with White River Conference Center, there were 68 pairs of shoes around the room. And we didn't acknowledge it. They were just random pairs of shoes sitting around the room. And we had all these really powerful moments. And, Katie Towns spoke and some leaders in the community spoke. And we all talked about mental health all morning. And we closed that morning with, you might have noticed, there's literally pairs of shoes on the stage and around the room. And the stats that we had at that time, in the most recent year we lost 68 people in Greene County alone to suicide. You
Mm.
think about the stories those people would have, that if they were still here and there were still people filling those shoes, how different our community would be, right? And it was just this powerful, powerful visualization of what we're really up against. And then last year, we talked about the flashlights and we had everybody turn their cameras on. And I think we've just stumbled onto something that is way bigger than Borrow My Angel. In fact, I won't name him, but one of the leaders in our community came up to me and said, I think what's so unique about this event is there are other events people are doing, certainly about mental health, right? But often they tend to be gathering mental health professionals to talk about mental health. And this is unique in the sense of, while certainly we have mental health professionals in the room and speaking from the stage, we're gathering the business community, the leaders in our community, to have a 2-hour morning to just talk about mental health because we need to talk about it more often. So that's my passion. If you want to get involved, that's an easy way. Please come join us that morning at White River on November 18th this year. But there's always other ways to get involved, as most nonprofits have. Connect with us on social media or on the website, and would love to visit more.
Is the information about the breakfast on the Facebook page too?
Absolutely. Or the
Okay.
URL is really easy to remember. It's the Rise to Break the Stigma event. The website to the event directly is www.risetobreakthestigma.org.
Okay.
Or again, our website is just borrowmyangel.org.
Okay. And I will put all of that in the show notes so they can easily find it. And then let's do this, as we get closer to the November date, let's come back on and do a Monday Mojo just about that event, you know what I'm saying? Because it was really good, and we'll, definitely promote it again, because I think what you're doing is fantastic. I appreciate who you are. I appreciate what you do. There needs to be more people, putting good stuff into the world like you are. And I appreciate you. I appreciate your wife because I know, what she's doing spectacular and together, man. What a team, man. It's pretty awesome. So I'm super proud. I'm super proud to know you. And I'm thankful. I know we did not get into any of the synergy financial talk. Lord knows I need some financial advice, but we'll save that for the next episode because we will
Sure.
definitely do this again, man. I really appreciate you, taking and making the time.
Well, Coach, a couple things. One, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. I'm going to come back a little bit because we were talking about, hey, if somebody's having a tough conversation, where to
Yes.
go. I definitely want to plug, and if you can put it in the show notes. Look, there's some good resources out there. I won't list them all. I'd tell you the three simple ones. Number one, certainly locally, Burrow, which is now Centerstone, has a 24/7 facility that is a crisis center. We're lucky because a lot of communities don't have that. That's if someone's in crisis, that's a great place to start. However, a lot of people still, even though you see all these ads about 988, aren't familiar with what 988 truly is. Look, if you don't know where to go, that's the simple one-stop shop. Go to call 988 or text it. You can do either one. They will literally walk you through what needs to be done. I used to think that 988 was just essentially suicide prevention hotline.
Sure.
It's far more than that. You can call it if it's like, hey, I've got a teenage son who's struggling and I don't know where to go. You can call it as a parent and go, I need resources for my kid, right?
Wow.
It is all things mental health, and it's a wonderful resource. So that's kind of the one-stop shop. Locally, there's one other. Katie and her team at the Greene County Health Department have done a good job. They're still building it out. There's a website that is 417 Mental Health. It's a lot more local resources and local focus to Southwest Missouri, but that's a really, really good one.
I love those. Those are fantastic. And I've had Katie on here, and it
Yeah.
was a fascinating conversation too, because, one of the questions I asked, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but, is there something going on that surprises you? Is there something that, you didn't necessarily see coming or, and her answer was, man, men over the age of 40, 45, struggling with, the thoughts of suicide and suicide, which was, I was kind of shocked to hear that. And the more I
Yeah.
thought about it, the more sense it made to me. You know what I mean? Because, go back to the way that age group was raised. They weren't raised to share their thoughts and their feelings. And that, when, I mean, none of us are exempt from adversity, right? And handling adversity is if you're not trained and skilled and you don't, like it's a struggle and it can be a struggle. So, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing those avenues.
Yeah, no question. And it's exactly it. Like we are that demographic, right? And it's true. I want to also comment one thing and then I'll finally shut up. But I appreciate the kind words because I very much feel the same way. I'm so excited that we got connected. I think the world of you. I love what you're doing with the podcast. I love what you do and just leading young men every day. I'm a big fan of the dang team to begin with. So I couldn't be more excited about the conversations we've had. Grateful for your friendship, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it, Chuck, and we will definitely stay in contact and continue because I do, man. I appreciate what you're doing, putting a lot of great stuff into the world. And I appreciate all of you that listen. I hope you'll share this one, because I'll
Yeah.
guarantee you, there's everybody listening to this is going to have been affected by somebody that has had issues. I guarantee it, and I think there's been I think you've shared a lot of great information that can provide hope for someone that is going through it. You just got to have some hope. You got to have some hope, and then you got to enlist some help. And you have been able to give us some of that. So, I hope everybody will get involved with, borrow my angel, and I appreciate you, Chuck, and I appreciate everybody listens to this. If you need me, my cell phone number is always in the show notes. My email's there. I'll help you in any way I can, as I'm sure Chuck will too. So until next time, adios, amigos.
See you, my friend.